Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee. Thank you for joining us. Today's meeting is the second part of the committee's investigation into overheating in London's homes. Before we get started, please may I remind everyone to switch their devices to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure their electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Please adjust your microphone so you can be heard clearly and remember to lift them from the base if needed. Members of the public are encouraged to follow @London Assembly on various social media platforms. When using X, please include the hashtag #AssemblyPlanning for this meeting. Before we begin, can I inform those watching today's meeting that the committee has launched a survey seeking first-hand accounts of how heat waves are affecting Londoners, with a particular focus on how residents cope during the recent heat wave a few weeks ago in May. Members of the public are invited to submit their views by the 5th of July, and the survey can be found on the London Assembly's social media platforms. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Lauren Harvey, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Assembly Member Baker and Assembly Member Moema, for whom Assembly Member Clark and Assembly Member McCartney are attending as substitutes.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendation set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? I will declare that Assembly Member McCartney, who will be joining us shortly at this meeting, sits on the Warmer Homes London board. Standing delegations. I propose that we take agenda items 3, 4 and 5 together. Can I ask the committee to note its membership and chairing arrangements, its term of reference and the standing delegations authority granted to me as chair as agreed at the Assembly's annual meeting on the 11th of May 2026. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March 2026 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence set and received?
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note the action taken by me as chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's response to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government's consultation on design and placemaking planning practice and the committee's Between Skyscrapers and Semis, London's Missing Mid-Rise Housing report.
Agreed.
We now move on, we'll be glad to hear, to our main item of business. The second part of our discussion on whether London's homes are ready for a heat wave. We've structured our meeting into 2 panels and I would like to welcome our first panel of guests. In the chamber we have David Strong, Design Director at Peabody, Dr. Anastasia Milona, Technical Director at the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, and Antonietta Cantor, Associate Buildings Decarbonisation and Climate Adaptation Team at Arup, London. And joining us online, we have Tom Dollard, Partner, Sustainability and Innovation, Pollard Thomas Edwards, and a member of the Good Homes Alliance. We'll now move on to the questions. And the first question will be from me. As temperatures rise in London, do you think it needs to be made easier to install air conditioning? Start with David.
Thanks, Chair. Initially, I'll self-identify as the least technical member of the panel, as being the Design Director of Peabody Housing Association. I suppose to answer your question directly, our view is no, not necessarily. And I think what we're looking at the moment in the design and construction of our new build homes is a hierarchy that effectively puts air conditioning last and seeks to kind of minimise and mitigate overheating in various kind of passive ways first before you go straight to air conditioning as the solution. I'm sure we can elaborate on that as the questions go on, but that's the kind of the direct answer to your question. Yeah.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. So no, passive measures first, but what we should be also looking is alternatives to air conditioning, because once you have put air conditioning everywhere, then you make the urban heat island effect much worse. So you make it much more difficult for those without air conditioning to survive the city, to walk in the city, and to reduce any energy for cooling. The thing that I think it's important is that we don't go from passive to air conditioning. There are other measures and systems that we could potentially be looking that they're more energy efficient. For example, we are currently looking at putting heat pumps everywhere in all the homes. Why don't we put systems that they are reversible so they can be used as heating in the winter and cooling in the summer? So the policy hasn't picked that up yet. So I think it's very important that we're looking at other options when passive measures are just not enough. Thank you.
I totally agree with the kind of short answer that should be no. We shouldn't prioritize those. Again, the energy hierarchy is definitely in place already in the London plan, and it should be followed. It's a really robust methodology to prioritize the least the least energy intensive options. In regard to the air source heat pumps, I slightly disagree with Anastasia, simply because when installing reversible heat pump, we end up having air conditioning effectively, which generates emission as much as a chiller would do. And that means that the heat rejections, which worsen the heat island effect, is still in place. And in addition to that, there would be increased energy bills for the occupants and increased carbon emissions during the summer, which currently we don't have, and increased electrical load on the infrastructure that our city is not ready to take at the moment if we were to install those on homes. A different conversation can be had for office buildings where cooling loads are already present, and using reversible heat pumps in those buildings can be an effective way of reducing embodied carbon and maximize efficiency all year round. But if we were to install reversible on every home, from experience, if an occupant has air cooling of any kind, they will use it even when heat is not at the extreme levels, and there will be additional energy consumption and additional carbon emissions and additional urban heat island effect. So our view, again, is to stick to the prioritization of passive strategies, not just at the building level, but primarily and beforehand at the urban scale, which then enables buildings to operate comfortably without the need for mechanical cooling.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, I'd back what the rest of the panel have said. I'd add that when we were writing our shading guide for homes, we really struggled to find any successful examples in London that dealt with extreme heat. So our homes are certainly not ready for any active measures like air conditioning. That would be the wrong approach. Even air source heat pumps aren't really the most appropriate technology. So enforcing the cooling hierarchy is the key to doing that. And we've presented many examples internationally and also around the UK in the Good Homes Alliance shading guide of how to do that. Very briefly, it involves external shading and management of internal gains. So minimizing communal heat network gains, internal gains of pipework and HIUs, reducing glazing areas or adding external shading and increasing ventilation, but not going down to air conditioning, which has huge implications for across energy infrastructure and the residents. It will increase their energy bills. Thanks.
Just as a follow-up to you all on that, is your view that the cooling hierarchy as currently stated is fit for purpose and shouldn't be altered in the upcoming London plan?
Can I jump in there? I think it's okay. It's just not being enforced. The key problem is it's not being enforced. There's at planning level, we're writing reports and designing buildings to meet either TM59 or other modelling methodologies, but mainly TM59. And we're not doing that following the hierarchy. We tend to be jumping straight to ventilation. And at the very best, there's a kind of notional nod to the more passive measures, such as reducing window elevations and shading. So enforcement, I think, is the key. We probably could tinker with it. I think shading is arguably slightly more important than internal gains, but if you've got large internal gains from communal heating and HIUs, then that's going to be the biggest issue. And then ventilation, of course, is important, but you need to stop the heat in the first place. So that priority, I think, is key, and enforcement of that is not being done at all. We're not seeing that done. So it's really then just open to the market to deliver that, and obviously there's a market failure in this instance.
Yeah, I totally agree with Tom. We have seen, as we've helped the HSC kind of review some of the planning applications for new homes in London, and what we found was that a lot of the times the submissions that are put forward for compliance with the cooling hierarchy are simply not fit for purpose, and there isn't enough scrutiny at the planning level to make sure that that hierarchy is put in place. And there's a tendency to kind of skip through the steps and justify with very mild attempts of reducing the glazing areas, for example, or reducing the G value without any real attempt to optimize the building design from a passive perspective. So I think it should probably be a combination of maybe perhaps rephrasing the way the London plan and the energy guidance is written, because at the moment kind of leaves space to that mixed interpretation of what is a like a maximization of the passive approach, and also a more strict scrutiny from the planners, essentially, to make sure that it is actually enforced, and whenever there isn't enough effort to minimize cooling, that should be criticized, and application should pushed back.
Yeah, I wanted to contribute maybe a kind of a real example that Peabody kind of worked on and designed and constructed recently before the introduction of Part O in the building regs. It's a building which is part of the wider BBC Television Centre redevelopment done by Stanhope. We've got two of the kind of the affordable buildings as part of that development, engineered by Arup, and the architect was McCraner Lavington, with external roller shutters on the outside of the building. It's 8-9 stories, so it's a high risk or a high rise building in today's money. But 6 or 7 years ago, we did the whole life cycle analysis of air conditioning or trim cooling or passive measures with external shutters, and we found the winner hands down was the passive measures, both from a construction, not putting as much kit into the building, but also on a whole life cycle and cost to residents perspective, which obviously was high on Peabody's priority. Interestingly, in discussing like kind of doing it again, a similar kind of building in a similar scenario with the architects recently, they're finding it almost more difficult to prove now with the introduction of Part O. As Tom says, the tendency is to kind of need to jump straight to a more mechanical or a kind of a cooling system, and it's related to the kind of the acknowledgement of being adjacent to a busy road, the reality of having your windows open at night whilst shutters have been cooling things during the day, etc. So and maybe the word isn't necessarily enforcement, but incentivization. If we can kind of incentivize the passive kind of measures and the real use of the cooling hierarchy, and not jumping straight to the mechanical and aircon solution, might be the way to go.
Antonietta, Arup's recent report on heat adaptation states that a balance between passive and active cooling will provide the greatest overall benefits to heat adaptation. How do you think that balance can be struck in London?
So that piece of work came after a previous piece of work that we did for the same client, for the Climate Change Committee in 2022, where we were focusing primarily on homes, on existing homes. The second piece was looking at a wider sample of buildings, including also offices. And while the first one was looking at comfort, which is basically the conditions that enable an average person with normal abilities to operate their building to undertake their daily life. The second report that was published last month, it was focused primarily on mortality and productivity in offices. So the focus of this second report was to avoid excess deaths related to heat. And when looking at that specific kind of topic, air conditioning was found to be, in some cases, the only option to then deliver that those conditions that would enable even the more vulnerable people to live a comfortable life. And when we talk about vulnerable people, these are the people that normally would struggle to operate their building as the younger generations or normally able person would. So they wouldn't be able to open windows, or they wouldn't necessarily even realize when the temperatures are going above the thresholds of comfort. So in this report, we have highlighted cooling as one of the possible solution, and sometimes the only possible solution when looking at how buildings would perform in the future more extreme weather scenarios. It's important to specify, though, that the results of that analysis were related to a scenario where before installing cooling, a set of passive strategies was tested and was implemented first. So the kind of focus from the Climate Change Committee was to understand what was the most cost-effective way of delivering comfortable temperature to prevent mortality and productivity and loss of productivity. But if that cooling was installed in buildings as they are now, without any adaptation first, the cost of that implementation would be much higher. So that cost effectiveness that is in the report wouldn't be applicable. So it's really important to kind of memorize that and don't lose it, because some of the media reports have kind of exaggerated the message and kind of claimed that cooling should be installed everywhere as the main strategy. That's not what our report said. Another important thing to consider is there are kind of shades of discomfort. So that was looking at avoiding discomfort in the very extreme weather scenarios. And it was to allow comfortable conditions throughout the year, every kind of, for the vast majority of the year, up until what TM59 in its current kind of delineation would say comfort means. If we were to retest the assessment with the new CM59, which we are about to publish this month, we would probably see those results to change significantly. And so my invite and our view in general is, again, cooling should only be left as the kind of last option and prioritize for those very vulnerable people, while the majority of homes should be adapted primarily with passive strategies, and that is feasible and that does achieve improvement in comfort.
Yeah, thank you very much for explaining that. Last month, the Climate Change Committee said we need to plan for more active cooling, such as air conditioning. Is that something you would agree with or want to push back on?
I think planning for it is good, because we cannot predict what the weather will be like. The recent climate projections in the last century have always been more optimistic than what the weather has actually been. So we might be in a position where our weather is actually going to be a lot worse than it is now. And there might be a point in time where we cannot do without cooling. I don't think that that is something we should build for, though. So planning for it and having an idea of kind of a sort of a contingency plan of what an emergency would look like and what we should be doing if that emergency happened is good to have in mind. But I wouldn't start introducing that cooling now when we don't have those conditions and we don't know if those conditions will happen. And as Anastasia said earlier, if we were to install cooling like on all of our buildings, what we would end up doing would be accelerate that global warming, and especially in London, in the dense urban areas, it would make the problem worse and worse, with a very important inequality characteristic, because the people that will be able to afford active cooling will only be the more wealthy one, and will reject heat into the street and in the urban environment where less wealthy people won't be able to survive and won't be able to have their own homes in a comfortable condition.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to come in on the Climate Change Committee saying that?
Chair.
Yeah, we're just,
sorry, I thought you were referring to us.
No. We'll to the panel. We'll pass to you afterwards. But yeah, did anyone else have any thoughts on the Climate Change Committee?
I think just like to add that, yeah, the media have taken it out of context. I think Antoinetta's point about these air conditioning being in series, it's not actually an option. We're not talking about equal options here. Air conditioning only should have been installed with passive measures first installed. So that is, quite difficult to argue with. However, you can argue with it, and I'd actually argue with what's just been said. We shouldn't be planning for air conditioning. Sure, planning, but the thing is, if you have a plan in place and you go and then install it, it basically allows people to wriggle out of things. And what end up happening is people just install air conditioning. If you can, you do. So actually, there's an argument of planning for not air conditioning. And that's what a lot of international, if you look at the international scene where they have extreme heat already, that's what they do. There are always two approaches, but in the tropics, in the equator, they have building design that is in context with the heat. They use shading, they use thermal mass, they use natural ventilation. They don't go straight to air conditioning. So we should be fundamentally reviewing the way we design and build and retrofit our buildings. That's the priority, not jumping to the easy box of let's just solve it with this. If we do that first, then we will never change the harder thing, which is the design and delivery and procurement of our buildings.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
I just asked a few sort of sporadic questions. Maybe I'll refer to our online guests first with this first one. Is passive cooling plus aircon more effective? If you set up a building with passive cooling, does it make any air condition you have to then implement later, does it make it more effective? Or the two things irrelevant?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the cooling hierarchy. It's got ventilation, which is essentially passive cooling. To a certain point, increased ventilation will have a cooling effect. So that should be prioritized, and that can be done. Large moves like dual aspect, triple aspect housing instead of single aspect housing. We're locking in a whole generation of homes, single aspect flats, that will have much higher risk of overheating. So yeah, natural ventilation like dual aspect and having that cross ventilation with opening windows is very effective in the shoulder months, and will only not be effective when the external temperatures, typically at night, are higher than internally. So you obviously can't cool if the temperatures outside are hot, or even if it's really polluted. So that's when cooling can help. But fundamentally, passive measures, so that's both passive house and airtight envelope, will help, because you'll have the thermos effect. You will be able to keep cool and warm. So anything like passive house is fundamentally the best thing to do. You should be high air tightness in the building fabric, and then natural ventilation, and of course then mechanical ventilation. So it's a mixed mode, to answer your question.
Okay.
But the extreme heat will be dealt with by air conditioning.
Okay, and the other question is, you made a comment about glass area and reducing that, but what does that do to the living environment? Because I live in a new build, which quite frankly has porthole windows as far as I can see, and then my lovely rich middle class neighbours live in Victorian houses with huge windows and are enjoying natural sunlight. So does it mean that I have to then suffer with my porthole? And people who can afford it have large windows and a pleasant place to live?
No, no, we're not saying that. It has to be, you have to balance. That's the role of a designer, to size the glazing, to meet daylight, views out. The benefits of sunlight in winter are, well documented and obvious. So we're not saying that, but we are saying, if you look at the recently built flats in London, they have oversized glazing areas. I'm being very general, but generalistic. The new London vernacular architectural style has large floor-to-ceiling glazing, and that is not helpful when it comes to daylight. You're not adding any more daylight with those sorts of windows. It's only really adding to view and possibly to sales values and to rentals values. So we're just kind of, it's a criticism of that contemporary architecture that has large-scale glazing areas that is contributing to overheating. And that bottom, just final point, that bottom part of the glazing isn't adding to daylight or health benefits. It's really just allowing you a view down onto the street, but it's not very good for privacy. You wouldn't want a large window in your bedroom, for example. So what we're really saying is consider the glazing area on the use case. So a bedroom, you might have a horizontal window and that's fine. A living area with a balcony, yeah, sure, you might have a full height glazing, but you need to consider how you're going to shade it. So you might have a balcony over it, or you might have dual deck access, or you might have external shading blinds.
Thank you. And I'll come to you, Antonetta. I just quickly want to go to David. How achievable are these things? Passive, our online guest talked about airtight dwellings and the like, when so much of our stock is old. Is this just a case of what you would be covering with retrofit anyway, or is this a special kind of retrofit, and where are the costs involved?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it actually, I was going to try and butt in with this example based on Tom's point as well. So Peabody is just completing its first passive house project on site later this year in Deptford, Deptford Landings Plot 6. So it's part of the Lend-Lease Master Plan. Interestingly, when we bought the planning permission from Lend-Lease, we said, okay, this looks like the right shape and size of a project to trial our first passive house project on. But we ended up needing to right size the glazing. As Tom said, there was too much glass there. It was going down to the floor. It wasn't helping anybody. You were going to see up underneath somebody's bed, all that kind of stuff. And so putting the glazing to the right proportion meant then that when we're investing in triple glazing for that glass, you're not paying over the odds for it. So in some ways, it's about kind of starting the design at the right point and investing in the things that make a difference. We tendered that project competitively, and there was a very small cost uplift. The way we designed it in as early as we could and tendered it competitively, we got a low single digit cost uplift compared to what people might say is a baseline building regs building. So we think it's becoming ever more possible and ever more cost effective. So if off the top of my head, we're trying to target somewhere between £2,000 and £5,000 per home uplift to achieve passive house. And that's way more cost effective than paying £10,000 or £15,000 later to try and retrofit it. And we've got projects going through our retrofit pipeline at the moment that are busting all the budgets that they started out with. So we're kind of making the argument internally that it's better to spend a little bit more upfront to head off that future investment in 10 or 20 or 30 years. Obviously, as Peabody, who ends up holding its stock for the long term.
Okay, Thank you, Antonetta.
Yeah, just a short comment on what you said about the Victorian house having bigger windows. I think, as everyone said, it's not that kind of proportion that is negative for overheating. If anything, we find that Victorian houses are typically built in a very good way for overheating, and that is because most of whenever they are transformed into flat, there's always a dual aspect most of the times for the dwelling. The ratio between windows and wall is in that range where you can get enough daylight and enough ventilation without adding too much solar gain. And the other really important thing, I think, is the thermal mass of the building. Back in the days, we used to build with materials that had a high thermal mass, which meant during the hottest hours of the day, the bricks would absorb the heat, taking it out of the space where people live, and they would release it at night when you would open your windows, and that heat would be kind of washed out by ventilation during the coolest hours. So that is an example that we should, if anything, we should try and replicate in our modern buildings. There are challenges to that, and I think that in general there are challenges to having buildings that operate passively, and that is primarily due to what our urban environments look like. They are noisy, they are polluted, they are unsafe. So in order to allow for natural ventilation and for buildings to really behave the way they could, we really need to action on the urban environment first. And I think that's somewhere where the GLA has a massive impact potentially to improve the way planning requirements are not necessarily just related on how buildings are built, but also about what the urban environment looks like. Things like requiring a depaving percentage. There's something that is happening all across Europe and in the world, Australia, the Americas. Paris is one big example where the city is committed to depaving a very high percentage of the urban fabric, basically. So requiring, for example, a major development to remove a lot of the concrete and replace it with permeable surfaces, with vegetation and trees. That's how you reduce the urban temperature, allowing for the buildings then to be comfortable without the need for cooling.
Okay. Chair, thank you.
Assemblymember Hamdash.
Just a quick question from me to Antoinetta. I think you had an interesting point about how it might be the most vulnerable who need air conditioning in their homes. But one concern for me is that there'll be a lot of overlap in that group of people who would struggle to afford air conditioning, who will struggle to maintain air conditioning. It's another thing to think about. So I'm just wondering kind of how we stack those challenges up as whether or not that's the right solution for that community.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, in my personal view, we should prioritize air conditioning for the public buildings or those that are managed publicly. So, for example, care homes where people live there and a lot of the time they don't operate the building themselves. They have carers that look after them, and there are communal spaces. So that's where cooling can be effective. There might be fundings from the public that help maintaining and so on. And you're totally right. A lot of the time, the most vulnerable people are the ones that need it the most and can't afford it or can't maintain it or can't install it. The other component is a lot of the time the more vulnerable people in the society, they tend to live more densely in homes. So it's not just about what the building looks like, but it's also about how many people there are in a room, and that is a massive component of generating heat within the space. So definitely allowing for more homes for people that need a home, so that there's no overcrowding. That is also a massive intervention for overheating, although it might not seem strictly connected to it. And as I said, I think making the environment where the buildings are cooler, that will help ventilation be more effective. Because if we open the window and it's just warm air coming in, nothing will change. But if we remove or reduce the number of cars, if we remove concrete from the floors and we make the surroundings cooler, those more vulnerable people will not need air conditioning in the first place.
Just a reminder to Assembly members, we are still on question one, so we'll have to try and keep it as tight as we can. No, we're on one. Assemblymember Boff. So last month, the Climate Change Committee's report, A Well-Adapted UK, warned that 92% of existing homes are at risk of overheating in 2050. Are you convinced that the kind of homes being designed and built in London today are going to be able to withstand the kinds of temperatures being forecast for 2050? And if not, why not? We'll start with Anastasia.
Assuming that the new homes are following the TM59 methodology, which requires a future weather file, so basically looking at how buildings are going to perform in the near future, and then the actual construction and delivery of the housing is based on the results of the design analysis, then it should be a robust design based on passive measures that could sustain near future climate changes in temperature.
Sorry to come back, but do you think that's happening?
So that would be my second point, which is, unfortunately, as an industry, we don't monitor. So we don't have any data. So I saw your kind of brief that asks, is there any evidence that Parto is working? I don't know. I haven't seen any data. Maybe the buildings that they are designed based on Parto, they haven't actually been occupied yet. But even if they have, I don't think we have monitoring processes and equipment in place so that we actually monitor temperatures and having the evidence and the data during hot periods that the passive measures work. Some buildings will, but I think there needs to be a requirement that we kind of get the data that we need in order to then feed back into our standards and our policies to make sure that what we're doing is correct. The other thing, it's a very difficult question to answer because although we have some projections for what the future is going to look like, I think Antonietta mentioned that we actually don't know. We don't know how extreme the extremes are going to be. We don't actually know how high the temperatures are going to be. And the problem with that is that going back to the question about the retrofit challenge is that perhaps the new build will sustain most of it and they remain cool for a lot of it, but all the existing stock is going to suffer, and the first thing people are going to do is they're just going to go to their local B&Q and they're going to buy air conditioning units that they are the least efficient and effective. And that was back to my original comment about having a strategy there and a potentially some kind of mechanical cooling to help people avoid that kind of knee-jerk reaction to high temperatures.
I think Assemblymember Lord Bailey was alluding to this earlier, but certainly from the new builds I've lived in, I feel like the problem is worse in new builds than with some of the existing stock when it comes to overheating. And I think we've got questions, I think, later, which...
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because they're relatively new build, that they haven't kind of followed the Part O advice and methodology. They will have big windows unshaded. I take your point about the daylight and the views. Of course, everybody wants them, but you can have them with the right kind of shading and the right kind of orientation and layout. If you have cross ventilation, I think Tom mentioned the right kind of shading, you can have bigger windows, optimize your daylight and optimize your passive measures for cooling.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to contribute, David?
Yeah, we're not convinced. We're more worried about the more recently built buildings. I think if you think about Peabody's kind of stock profile, it's got the heavy, thick brick Victorian buildings from the 1860s, etc., and then it's all the way up to present day. And I'd like to think that the projects on the current drawing board are thinking more thoroughly about the future. But I would say there's a time period of the previous 10 or 20 years from now where we've got I suppose disjointed building regulations where heating and cooling or heating and overheating aren't considered in the same part of the building regs, and so people are kind of resolving for one but not solving the next one, and as a result buildings are getting lighter. They're good from a keeping a heat in perspective, but because they're so light, the materials are light, they'll overheat worse. And as others have said, the London vernacular of having windows that are slightly too large and glass down to the floor will exacerbate that. So just I'll reference a kind of an in-house study that we're doing at the moment, which is about bringing more mass and weight back into our buildings. So it's not about chasing kind of the building regs only, but it's kind of saying, learning from our Victorian stock maybe in short, and kind of seeing, is there a better way that we can build a wall that's doing what it needs to do from a keeping the heat in perspective, but actually is slowing and reducing the risk of overheating as well.
And a lot of that Victorian stock of Peabody's is in my constituency, and it's often in much better condition than buildings not necessarily built by Peabody, but ones that went up 5-10 years ago.
Yeah,
and it seems just mad that can be the case.
Well, that kind of piece of analysis is forming the backbone of this study I mentioned, and when you look at those old walls, there's literally 2 or 3 materials in them, whereas a wall being constructed today has 25 different components put together by 11 different subcontractors. So there's so many more kind of interfaces and things to go wrong. There's almost nothing that can go wrong in in the heavy mass brick walls from the Victorian era. Yeah.
Thank you. No one else, so we'll pass to Assembly Member Block. Oh,
Can I jump
Tom?
in? Yeah, hi. So very directly to answer the question, no. But I take Anastasia's point that buildings we're designing from now on using the new TM59, which actually isn't kind of now, it's what would be phased in, I guess, in the next few years. But certainly in the last 10, 20 years, the homes built, especially flats, houses, it's slightly better performance, but flats are nearly all overheating. We don't have good data, Anastasia is right. We do have some post-occupancy evaluation that the Good Homes Alliance is peer reviewing. The example is actually from the LLDC, Chobham Manor, so the homes to the just off the Olympic Park. And that report should be out very soon. We're presenting it in our conference on the 8th of July. And their resident interviews, resident feedback, and internal temperatures, external temperatures were monitored for about a year. And we have data that shows they're overheating. And they are typical New London vernacular flats, not even that tall. They're kind of 4 to 6 stories with standard design for flats, I guess, and dual aspect as well. So it's not necessarily the single aspect that's the problem. But the reasons why, so that yes, they're overheating. Anecdotally, there's a lot of evidence. If you only need to go on various forums, you'll see residents complaining about overheating in new build flats. We don't have enough data though, so we do need to do more POE. So that's post-occupancy evaluation, resident feedback. We can do that through the GLA's Affordable Homes Programme, which should require post-occupancy evaluation and monitoring to be carried out. And GLAP, obviously GLAP sites, Royal Docks, Old Oak, and LLDC. So the major GLA sites should be doing post-occupancy evaluation to help this issue. So fundamentally, yes, they're overheating. I guess the next question is what we can do about them. But the reasons why, we've talked about glazing. We haven't really talked about communal heating. That is a big problem, especially 10 years ago when we were doing high temperature.
We will have questions coming on district heat noise.
Okay.
Yeah, and we will, as a committee, be visiting Chobham Manor shortly as well. So thank you for mentioning that. Assembly Member Boff.
Yes, I'm aware we're well over time, so I'll try and be as quick as possible. Mr. Strong, you said that you were now putting on blinds on the outside of buildings to cool them down, and then Ms. Cantor said that actually a hot building can do some good things overnight. So what really is the effect of the tall buildings that have become such a fashion in London? You know, tall buildings, you know, these large vertical slabs of concrete that suck up the sun. What contribution have they got to urban heat islands?
So I just want to clarify, do you mean very recent tall buildings, or say, you know, the 1970s kind of large panel concrete?
All of them, tall buildings.
I think, what contribution do they have? Yeah, I suppose they are kind of, if they're keeping mass on the outside and taking heat in during the day, and slowing it kind of coming into the homes themselves, that's doing what it should be doing for the residents who live in those buildings, and additionally, you know, they're allowing, you know, they're being exposed then to the cooler winds or air temperatures at night. They're kind of releasing that heat, you know, once the temperature kind of shifts to.
That makes sense, but when you're in a climate where it doesn't get that much colder at night, which we may very well be in soon. That doesn't have an effect, and even though you can protect the residents, I'm talking specifically about the heat island effect of those structures.
Sure. Well,
you know, and also the mostly flats.
Yes, and I would link it again to another piece or a related piece of study that we're doing internally about building at kind of more livable densities and heights and development patterns as well, and maybe there is a shift, or maybe there is a kind of an intention to move away from the very tallest tower block.
I'd like to see that
on podium. Yes, and the point then is if you're at a livable density, if you're kind of forming courtyards, then you're forming microclimates which are, warmer in the winter, shadier in the summer, etc., and can help with air movements, etc. So that is linked to the previous study that I mentioned about what we build out of. It's like, what development patterns would we like to move our development program towards? There are a certain number of projects that are in our pipeline that are started off on a certain footing before that study has started. So it's not to say that everything we'll do from now onwards will follow this kind of pattern that you're discovering here. But I think it's certainly an intention in Peabody to kind of ask ourselves: is building at the really tall buildings still the right thing for us? Yeah.
As you know, Chair, I could go on on this subject for many hours, and I'm going to stop there because there is a glimmer of hope from Peabody with regard to that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, panel. Antoinette, you came onto this briefly, but I'm just wondering what the main factors are which influence vulnerability to overheating in London.
There's different factors, different aspects. One is the mobility capacity of a person. Obviously, someone that cannot walk or cannot move freely in their home won't be able to open their windows and operate their blinds and things like that. So definitely the mobility is one component. The second component is age. We know that younger children and elderly people suffer the heat more than kind of middle-aged people, and that is because they have a lower ability to recognize the heat, and therefore they react more slowly compared to other people to what could be potentially dangerous situation. And then there's the social vulnerability. People that maybe live a situation of disadvantage, they might have mental issues or alcohol problems or anything that kind of create some instability in their everyday life, which might not have the capability, again, to kind of plan their actions and plan the way that they can make their building more comfortable. And then the last component, I would say, is the economic vulnerability. So people that cannot afford to install shadings or to install air conditioning or to change their windows or buy a new house because there's 5 of them in a flat, but they can't move to a bigger house, that makes them more vulnerable and a higher risk compared to others.
So do you think overheating is an inequality issue?
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, it's sounding like one. I'll hand back to you, Chair, in the interest of time, because I realise we're...
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Hamdash.
Great. Thank you very much. So this question specific for Tom and Anastasia. In the 2019 Good Homes Alliance Overheating and New Homes Tool and Guidance, you identify 4 key factors that can contribute or to mitigate overheating. In your experience, what are the most effective ways that these principles can be put into practice on real projects, particularly where there may be competing pressures, e.g. viability?
Would you like to have the answer primarily for new build homes or for retrofit?
Let's start with new build.
New build. Right. So fundamentally, any solutions to overheating need to deal with the causes, and the causes are set out in the cooling hierarchy, but they relate to building physics and building physics models. So heat comes about through internal gains in a home. So that's everything from people to electrics, but the biggest source of internal heat gains at the moment in new build flats and houses is the communal heating system. So the pipework and the HIUs that have been poorly designed. They have a high temperature, high flow rate, and 80 degrees, and they're on 24/7. So that is your heating on all the time in your flat, even through summer, even through night when you don't need it. And it's doing your hot water. So that's probably the biggest problem of poor design. The second one is large glazing. We've talked about that. Third one is internal, so ventilation, so we've talked about that, and then there's cooling beyond that. So the measures that, if we go through those, the measures you can deal with are fundamentally have a building services that doesn't have internal gains. So an individual heat pump will certainly improve that, or a low temperature system, low temperature loop will hit that. Secondly, shading. So the glazing needs to be spec'd for the right size. We've discussed that already. So, but external shading will certainly help. And then the third thing is thermal mass. That will certainly help regulate temperatures at night time, which is the biggest problem. So our guide, the overheating tool, there's a risk assessment that you can carry out, and we recommend that all new developments carry out that risk assessment. You can then see how bad the situation is for your context, and the biggest factors are site location, site characteristics. So the urban heat island in London is a significant problem for nighttime temperatures. And then it's are they flats? Is it houses? What type of home? Then it's communal heating. Does it have this hot pipe work? And only then it's onto solar heat gains and ventilation. We've then, in the guide, and I won't go into any more detail, I think I'll stop now, but in the guide we then talk about exactly what do those measures entail, so what sort of shading, and we've got a follow-up guide which is called the shading guide, and that details exactly the various measures and how successful they are, different types of blinds, shutters, internal, external, automated, manual, and the various costs involved. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
I would just add one more element to what Tom described already, and we're about to publish kind of an addendum to our existing overheating guidance on ceiling fans. So having the space, the height in the room to actually be able to fit a ceiling fan. They're very effective up to a certain temperature because they move the air and they create that draft that you might not get from opening the windows. They're very, very effective measures in most of the Mediterranean countries. You use them quite a lot before the temperatures exceed a certain, extreme number. But at the moment, most of the flats, especially flats and new houses, the height within the room is not allowing for these measures. So that's another kind of very effective, very easy and very low cost and very low energy measure that is not currently considered in the UK and is not considered now, but also is not allowing. We're not allowing for its consideration in the future either.
Just a follow-up from me. I'm a local councillor as well, and I've had the honour of being on planning committee for 4 years in Islington. Barnsbury Estate is a new development, and the plan had to come back to introduce second staircases in light of the height of the building. In that process, the plan that came back had a substantial increase in the number of single aspect homes across the estate. Do you think that there's a number of competing priorities where, unfortunately, might overheating in new builds fall down the priority level? Or are we at risk of seeing more new builds in the competition for viability? Or might it be that we lose other things like more affordable housing in this process when there's so many competing needs?
I think so, yes. At the moment, because you look at the different aspects of building design through different parts of the regulations and approved documents, we have in the past looked at how there is conflicting priorities between safety and overheating and energy use and ventilation. But my understanding is that there is at the moment a holistic review of all the parts to look at how they can be better coordinated. So I think I'm hoping that this is going to improve the way we look at buildings holistically, because I don't think we should prioritize one over the other under the right or the wrong circumstances. Overheating or lack of access or any or lack of ventilation, they can all be equally dangerous to the occupants, as we have seen in the past. Thank you.
Can I just add on to this? I think that typically happens when things are considered in sequence rather than holistically. And when overheating is considered at the end of the design process rather than at the very start, there are ways to design a building for it to be energy efficient, comfortable, fire safe, and all of the other requirements altogether. But unfortunately, often we see buildings are designed for compliance rather than for performance, and requiring a more kind of comprehensive set of proof of good design at planning stage is also quite important. At the moment, we see that not always all of these components are kind of checked at the right stage. And when that doesn't happen, you end up having a building that might be in that kind of conflicting area. Things like the one you just explained could have been avoided if instead of designing a classic typology of block of flats, other typologies were explored. For example, the ones with external corridors, where you have an external staircase with an external corridor where you then access homes from there. We have a lot of these examples again in the older building stock, which work fine, are often much more homey, let's say, than a new built flat with a single aspect, and they perform better from energy and from overheating perspectives.
Yeah, I'd back that up. Can I just add one thing? I think it's definitely needs a design-led approach, and that's possibly not happening. It does need to be holistic. Actually, slightly ironically, the GLA took out the housing density matrix, known as the Sustainable Residential Quality Matrix, I think in 2019. And as developers, that was a really useful tool. It set out required densities, which is fundamentally the issue for sustainable development across overheating, viability, everything. It set out more strict advice on building heights, and that's been removed. And so it's been put back to the market. Now, of course, the market is going to go higher and higher and higher. From an independent point of view, we haven't seen the GLA push back on that. In fact, the GLA at officer level certainly have been pushing for densities in design reviews. And so, yes, this is a problem. This is a problem of viability, but there is a design answer. So allowing designers to design this in at the earliest stages with viability reviews is the way to do it. And deck access, galleried access is an answer. 6 to 8 stories is the sweet spot. You don't need to go above that. Thanks.
Just to follow up on that, I'd want to come to David, because there's just been a suggestion about 6 to 8 stories. We did an investigation as a committee into mid-rise housing and found that viability was a massive problem there, because once you get to about 6 stories, you then incur second staircase, and above that it becomes very difficult to build anything between, say, 6 and 9. How do you find building at that height? How do you find the affordable housing? As a developer with a commitment to affordable housing challenges that we've heard from some developers in terms of compliance with policy, alongside build costs, increased energy costs, increased labour costs, regulation around both heating and cooling. Where does cooling fall within those challenges, and how are you finding viability?
Yeah, thanks. I think, like everybody at the moment, viability is really difficult, and I suppose it's back to the point about things being kind of introduced and needing to be addressed in a kind of a sequential or a fragmented kind of way. You had an outline design, then you needed second staircases, then you had parts FL, O and S, then you had building safety regulator, etc. So each of those kind of things has kind of added complexity, both in the actual buildings themselves, but in the process of development. It's not to say that they're each not important and well-intentioned, but it has, over the past 5, 6, 7 years, really changed the assumptions on which you might have bought pieces of land that many years ago. So yeah, all together and taken over the years, it's hit viability massively. I suppose, and linked to Andrew's question earlier about the height and density and things like that, and Peabody asking itself what is best to build now and into the future. If we take kind of density, we are exploring to see what sort of densities we can develop at 6 stories, because you're right, nothing is going to be developed at 7 or 8 stories, because it makes very little sense to go through that extra. So you need to get to 10. It's either 6 or 10 to be anyway sensible. And I suppose there are certain parts of the city that will encourage that or not kind of price us out of being able to do that. There are other parts of the city that it's a kind of a numbers game, and if you're going to compete in Alperton for a piece of land, then you're competing with everybody else who's going to build 20 stories, etc. So there are parts of the city that are kind of going to be more and less conducive to building at scales and heights and densities that are probably more livable in the long term.
Just in broad brushstrokes, what areas do you think that is viable versus not?
I suppose just looking at our own kind of where we own land at the moment, we've got some sites in Lewisham, some sites in Hackney, etc., where we know the answer won't be, a race to height and density. The being a manor lead kind of neighbour will cause you to build at a more livable height and density, 4, 5, 6 stories. So we don't have sites everywhere across the city, but some of them have been kind of advocating, the more the better, etc. So, and not that we're entirely out of having a voice in that kind of conversation, but certainly it comes into the discussion about the parts of town that are advocating for height and more numbers, and those that are actually thinking about their broader community, etc. So, but I suppose on the viability piece, kind of trying to deal with changing regulations and kind of moving targets, and also trying to kind of deal with sites that were perhaps bought under very different circumstances 8-10 years ago. Trying to do both is potentially financially ruinous. So we're going to have to pick the right times to kind of change towards different patterns of development.
Thank you very much. Just opening out now, in our first meeting we heard that it can be hard to convince planners to allow shading on buildings because, quotes, it doesn't look like a British building. Are there designs or features that we could employ which would help address overheating that may be more in keeping with British buildings, or do we need to accept new designs as temperatures rise?
One thing I discovered, I'm not British myself, but I found out that this is not true, actually, that all the British buildings did have shutters, and we do see them in some coastal towns. They're just there for decoration now. But most of our Victorian buildings did have external shutters, and especially commercial buildings. There's some pictures of older London where you see a lot of awnings outside shops just to protect from the sun. I read an interesting article about this the other day, saying that essentially the UK forgot about shading in the moment when air conditioning became cheaper, became easier to install. At that time, energy was very cheap in the UK, so people just stopped installing shadings and prioritized cooling instead in public buildings and office buildings. And that kind of cascaded into how we started designing residential buildings as well. So I would be very, very happy if this was challenged and if there was a massive incentive for local planners to allow for external shading also on conservation areas and listed buildings, because this is not something that is not coherent with the British traditional architecture. It's just been forgotten in time. So that's very important. And I think another point to make is that in general, aside of whether these are or are not typical of British architecture, I think that there should be more of a pragmatic approach in how planning permissions are granted. Even in those conservation areas, it is important that all components are considered, and in a scenario where we are at risk of losing a habitable planet, we need to really consider whether preventing shadings in favour of air conditioning is something that is still reasonable, just for the sake of preserving the traditional architecture.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Assembly Member Clark.
I'm going to come to you first, David. Are there measures that the GLA or the government should be looking at to financially incentivize the adoption of overheating mitigation adaptation?
So to financially incentivize it, I mean, yes, that would be great. What would work? I suppose it could be, grant, for example, not linked to only numbers, but to actual performance, and not to building reg compliance, but to achieving demonstrable heating and overheating performance, such as passive house and such as mitigation of overheating, and probably backed up with post-occupancy evaluation. I think we did take part in a GLA pilot on post-occupancy evaluation about 4 or 5 years ago, which ran its course and was helpful for us. But the intention, I thought, was that it was going to make its way out to the wider environment, but and to become almost like maybe a condition of a certain kind of maybe incremental funding on top of maybe a standard amount. And so, yeah, I think if it's linked to something that kind of can make a difference, and other than numbers, I think that would be really helpful in terms of incentive. Yeah.
And just more widely to anyone else, if we're thinking about the people who are quite vulnerable to heat, a lot of them will be also in the private rented sector. Do we think there's ways that government or GLA could be incentivizing those housing providers and people who rent out homes to make those homes better able to manage extreme heat?
I think I jump in there. I think financial incentives are really tricky, aren't they? There are a few, and they always have unintended consequences, and especially in this market of viability. It's very tricky viability. It would be tricky to do. However, I think there's a lot you can do around signalling and softer incentives. So funding, for example, funding research, that we've already mentioned, there's a massive lack of data in this area. There are some post-occupancy evaluation studies, like UCL have done one with us at the Good Homes Alliance. Loughborough have got one study at the moment, and there's a few landlords doing it, like Peabody, Clarion, some of the other G15 are starting to do this. And the Good Homes Alliance is trying to corral that group to make it easier to share lessons, because that's the other thing. People do these studies and then they don't share. But I think if the GLA were behind that, and national government behind that as a government-led project, that would really crack open this whole issue, and not just overheating, all the other problems of systemic poor construction quality in our industry, lack of design. All these things impact acoustic quality, moisture, higher energy bills, poor homes because of the process. So this is just one aspect of poor outcomes in new housing. So I think, more research into POE, and that could be a GLA funding their own developments. So the Affordable Homes Programme currently, all social housing, and possibly having impact on the private rented sector as well. And then I think it does have to be a bit of stick though, but I'd allow permitted development. So I think allowing permitted development to have with some guidance around shading. How do you do shading in a conservation area, for example? Speaking to that point, you can have traditional awnings, which have been around since Victorian and Georgian eras. You can have traditional shadings that were on Buckingham Palace in 1890. So there are lots of examples. So commissioning some guidance through the London Plan and then allowing that through permitted development and planning would be a real easing up of the barriers.
Can I add to that as well? Examples in other countries show us that things like reduction of VAT on construction for those projects that achieve certain performance can be achieved. So that would obviously help developers doing the right choice. And one thing that could help as well, especially for those vulnerable people, is connecting those incentives not just with good building design, but with interventions in the urban environment. So say, for example, if you do if you do a renaturing intervention in the surroundings of your building and you remove the concrete, you can get a full discount of VAT. So there's some interventions of this type. And the other component is incentivize the market to improve the kind of availability of those interventions and those measures, such as shutters. And Tom was bringing the point of research, which is really important. One challenge that we see, especially in high-rise buildings with external shading, is fire. The fire regulations now sometimes compete with the possibility of installing shadings made of wood, for example. Research and developing a methodology or approaches to design that can make good for both fire and overheating is something that can definitely be helped. And then thirdly and lastly, bringing together decarbonisation, energy efficiency and climate adaptation in retrofit policies is something that we really need to see more. The Warm Home Standard is doing something in that direction, but I don't think it quite closed that gap. Ensuring that before any insulation is installed, there is a check on the effectiveness of ventilation, for example, is something that would prevent overheating and unwanted effects on retrofit.
That's really helpful. Anyone else? No. Okay, I'll hand it back to you, Chair.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with Tom and then come to Anastasia. We heard from the guests in our first meeting that district heating networks contribute to overheating risk of some dwellings. How can these risks be mitigated? Because the other end of the argument that we've heard a lot about is how energy efficient these heating mechanisms are, and now we're in a quandary: do we pursue the energy efficiency or do we avoid the overheating? So can they be mitigated?
Yeah, sure. So this is quite, it depends on the context, obviously, this answer. But if we start with heat networks that were installed, say, 10 years ago, they tended to be a high temperature system, so 80-degree flow temperatures, which is on all the time going through your flats and your buildings, heating the building throughout the summer. So that's clearly a problem. So to retrofit those, we've actually been involved in either changing the flow temperatures and therefore the plant, so swapping in heat pumps with a low temperature system, to add ventilation in communal areas that get really hot, so adding in louvres and opening vents to communal areas to cool them down, and then to add shading. So the LLDC, for example, is looking at that on their homes in the Olympic Park, how they add shading. For new build, it's less of a problem now because we do have lower temperature systems. Ambient loops are being installed as the standard technology, and the standard engine to that is a heat pump instead of a high temperature gas boiler. So it's less of a problem in like the homes designed now, but yes, and we do have a whole pipeline of projects and having been built in the last decade that do have that problem.
Yeah, just a lived example, the project I mentioned earlier, which is our passive house pilot at Deptford Landings, also has a low temperature heat network. So the water going around the building, instead of 80 degrees, is 20 degrees. And then there's a kind of a piece of kit in each resident's home which kind of gets that water and upgrades the heat to, shower and bath temperature, etc. So, and that's helpful because, that building's going to be good from keeping the heat in, but it's also going to minimise the overheating caused by the district heat network, which serves 189 homes. So it's going to be efficient, but it's going to not be contributing to overheating.
And I guess the other very obvious thing is insulate the pipework, because a lot of the times we see insulation is poor or non-existent, and so improving that can help.
Is there a certain type of building or development where a district heating system would be inappropriate because you can't mitigate it enough to make it to make sure that it doesn't just overheat the building?
I mean, I think you're still going to get problems with a low temp, even if you had a low temperature system on certain designs, which is another way of answering your question. So if you have, high rise are quite difficult. with long lateral lengths of ductwork of pipework, to insulate. It's still very difficult to stop that heat getting into the flat with certain designs. It kind of comes back to the design of the building services rather than the design of the homes. The more you can do up front dual aspects going to really help. An efficient form factor is going to help, and multiple risers instead of lots of laterals, so horizontal runs of pipework would help. Fundamentally, I think we should be going, and some developers, in fact, publicly now, Barratt London have said they're just doing passive house for a new build. The reason why they're doing that is because then they don't have to connect to the district heat networks, because they're passive house, they don't need any heat. They're doing individual exhaust air heat pumps instead that does cooling, heating, ventilation and hot water all in one. So it's a big box that does everything. It's a ducted air-to-air system. Then they don't have to have any communal heat network connection fees. That's saving them millions of pounds. So the slight uplift for passive house, they're saving even more. So it's a cheaper system by not connecting to the heat networks or even building their own block network. And that's helping the overheating risk. So I think that's the ultimate design.
Okay.
The best one. Yeah.
Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Assemblymember Boff.
Thank you. How much? Oh, we're well behind time, aren't we? Sorry about that. Very quickly, Mr. Strong, I'd love to see the details of that system that you described, which I think is an ambient temperature heat network. Yeah. Because within the London plan, it was very difficult for that to get passed, because the London plan implies that, or rather some of the directions imply that you can't have those heating facilities in each individual place. So I'd be really grateful if you could send me that, because it's
we'd be happy to share.
On for quite a while.
It should be publicly available on the planning submission as well. So
just point us in the right direction. Saves me trawling through. How can a Londoner assess whether or not their homes are at risk of overheating? What should they be looking at, and what are the danger signs?
There is some guidance produced actually from the Good Home Alliance. It's like a checklist, very simple, and in simple terms, where you can kind of assess whether your home is likely to be overheating based on a number of characteristics, such as window area and availability for ventilation and things like that. We also have more kind of advanced methodologies, such as Parto and TM59, but they are more of a technical tool, I would say. But in general, I mean, overheating in operational buildings is something where there isn't really a best practice recognized approach to assess. We have found some of our clients try to assess overheating in an existing operational building, and it's not very straightforward, because you can monitor temperatures, obviously, but the temperatures can be affected by how the people use the building and whether they are using it correctly, whether they're opening the windows at the right time, whether they're using a lot of appliances altogether. So just by monitoring temperature, you cannot really get that objective information, and that's probably something we need to work on as a construction industry.
But in terms of a home dweller, not a professional, a home dweller, you're saying there is stuff out there to advise
There is
them.
the GLA, the GHA, Good Home Alliance checklist, which helps.
Checklist. Thank you very much. I'll cut that short, please.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Boff. Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
What issues should the government be focusing on as part of its review of approved document O? Yeah, and is it in conflict with other parts of the building code? Let me start with David, maybe, and Tom, you can come in, and then anybody else.
Yeah, I think my experience or seeing approved document O coming in and effectively drawing together things that hadn't been looked at together previously, like noise, acoustics, ventilation, overheating, and actually causing you to consider those things together was quite a helpful thing that it did. I think it's done that, but it's not yet kind of causing you to kind of think about the building ever more holistically in terms of heating and cooling. And I think it's still a kind of we're still looking at a fragmented approach. And so I suppose whether it's approved document O or the broader review of regulations and approved document parts, if they start to kind of incentivise people to look at the whole system and not just this item in this column, that item in that column, and prove them all individually. I think that's what's been kind of putting things at odds with one another and causing design solutions for problems that are created by other parts of the regulations, for example. So I think my broad point would be if we can, propose or push for things to be kind of more holistically viewed altogether in a less fragmented way, would be the ideal ask for the government or the people who are reviewing that part and others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's quite a full answer, Chair. Maybe we should move on.
Assembly Member Hamdash.
Thank you. Just another question to David, actually. So Peabody's call for evidence response called for major retrofit schemes to trigger an overheating assessment. How should this be done?
Yeah, I think following the kind of the guidance that's available, the Good Homes Alliance kind of guidance, and maybe we haven't kind of established an in-house kind of bespoke checklist or way of assessing yet our existing stock. But in the same way that from a heating perspective that we have a way of establishing whole house performance, I think it'd be obviously important that we did that from an overheating perspective as well. And again, I talk about breaking down the silos in individual grant funding. I suppose recently and up until recently we've availed of social housing decarbonisation funding. So that's kind of attacking a particular topic, and we've applied for that grant and spent it and improved homes in that area. And I suppose then there's potentially another thing that comes along about overheating and applying for grant and being incentivised to kind of only solve that item as well. So I think if we can kind of bring regulations together, funding streams together, incentives for building owners like ourselves to kind of look at the performance of the whole house or the whole building, that's bound to be more efficient. Yeah.
Can I jump in on the previous question just very quickly on Part O and what that should be focusing on? First of all is incorporating the new TM59, which is about to come out, which is improving the methodology by a lot, is basing it on a much more robust evidence base than it was before, and is making that assessment a lot more realistic and connected to what the experience of people is, especially at night time. The other thing that I would welcome very much is removing some of the very strict constraints in relation to noise that are currently in the guidance, and the constraints on opening the windows, which again, they don't have a very strong evidence base. And the quickest way to kind of solve all of these issues in once would be, in my view, to simply relate the requirement to the latest version of TM59 available. CIPS is doing a great job at kind of keeping that set of guidance up to date as much as possible. And if there was a mechanism for Part O to kind of refer directly to the latest version, that would make the process a lot more efficient and avoid any backlogging of the regulations.
Thank you very much. Just a very quick follow-up on that. Just on the windows, what was it you saying about the restrictions on opening them?
Yes, currently Part O, when you do the modelling for overheating, requires you to only allow for a very tiny portion of your windows to be openable, which is obviously making the results a lot worse. And the massive negative effect that we see is that a lot of buildings are being required to install cooling, even if by opening those windows probably wouldn't need that.
Thank you. Our final question is from Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. And I want to pick up on the TM59 that you've talked about. Perhaps I could ask Dr. Milona. Can I ask what feedback you've had from the industry on TM59? And I know you've recently reviewed it, and just, I suppose, how have you improved it? Because I understand that previously lots of risk assessment was done against sort of a mid or mild summers. How is it improved?
On your first question, TM59 is actually an industry document, so it is written by industry, has been tested by industry, because there wasn't a consistent way for assessing overheating, different assumptions, different input data. So introducing TM59 is something that made things easier for the industry to assess, but also consistently present that risk to their clients, to the authorities, etc. And your second question, sorry.
I suppose, is the way it's operating, is it still underestimating real-world overheating risk?
I don't. I guess there have been some improvements to TM59 to make sure that it's more relevant. I don't think it is underestimating overheating. The reality of the situation is that there are still. So, sorry, to go a step back. TM59 is a calculation methodology using dynamic simulation models. So by definition, there are a lot of assumptions going into that, including how the building is going to be occupied, what weather file you're going to use, weather profile, systems, all of it. So when you are running that model, you cannot predict overheating. What you can do, because none of your assumptions are going to be accurate. But what you can do is assess which of the design options you are considering are more effective. So you are testing 3 different types of shading, which one is more effective? You're testing 3 different types of systems, which one? Or opening windows. So you compare between options and you choose the one that is more effective. So the question on underestimating or overestimating, there's always going to be that, because we will always get that extreme weather event that we just didn't predict. And that's going to be, of course, underestimating overheating in that case. Does that answer your question?
That makes perfect sense.
Okay, thank you.
To come in.
So just as a background, I am one of the authors of the new TM59, so I'm quite familiar with what's gone into it. And to answer your question, the new criterion on nighttime comfort has been tested in parallel with a lot of modeling done by a number of engineering consultants, which kind of tested whether what we know being good design would give good results in the assessment or not. And in parallel to that, it was also the results from the modeling were also compared to results from real life testing done by Loughborough University, which had a number of sample homes with people living their normal life, and they assessed the comparability of the results from the modeling with the perception of the actual residents. So we've made the update so that those 2 sets of results were as aligned as possible, notwithstanding what Anastasia obviously said, which is in relation to the divergence between the real weather and the modeling. But the assumptions we put together at the end are as close as possible to what we can predict.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
We've now reached the end of the first panel discussion. I would like to thank our first panel of guests for attending today's meetings and for their contributions. We'll now take a short adjournment for 5 minutes while we change panels. Welcome back to the London Assembly's Planning and Regeneration Committee. We now continue our discussion on whether London's homes are ready for a heatwave. I would like to welcome our second panel of guests. In the room, we have Jules Pipe, CBE, Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and the Fire Service, Elliot Kemp, Policy Team Leader, London Plan, Greater London Authority, and Dan Bicknell, Climate Adaptation Manager, Greater London Authority. We will now progress to questions, and the first question is from myself to the Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, as temperatures rise in London, do you think it needs to be made easier to install air conditioning?
Apologies for putting a question back to you, but what do you mean by easier for making it to fit air conditioning? Clearly, under my remit, I'm assuming that you mean through the planning process. And does that mean what, in new build? Because obviously the plan isn't in place to guide retrofitting individual properties that currently are built. It's about new build.
Yeah.
If the question is about how we allow more air conditioning in new built property, I should probably start by saying that there is no ban on air conditioning. I would invite anyone in on the committee to point out to me where in the plan there is any wording that prevents air conditioning being included in a new build. Perhaps it would help the committee if I read the sentence or two in the plan. SI4, if I just scroll down to it, it's saying only about one sentence. If you just bear with me as I find it. 15. It says, SI4B, major development proposals should demonstrate through an energy strategy how they will reduce the potential for internal overheating and reliance on air conditioning systems in accordance with the cooling hierarchy. Now, I've seen some coverage. Sadly, I've even seen some questions from politicians, including national politicians, that seem to suggest that there has been a ban, and also that it's couched in terms, rather oddly, that whilst everyone agrees it's perfectly acceptable to say maximise insulation and thermal efficiency, because we wouldn't dream of telling pensioners and people on low incomes to just dial up the thermostat, somehow it's socially and politically acceptable to say to people, doesn't matter if your houses are badly designed, positioned, badly shaded, go and turn on your air conditioning. I just don't understand. It's completely obtuse. All the plan says is that maximise passive measures that will cost the occupants nothing. The positioning of the building, solar shading, green roofs, minimising the amount of tarmac and concrete around the base that's reflecting heat up onto the building, and so on. Maximise the albedo factor of the surface of the building. And then if it doesn't meet the required standard, and then then it doesn't prevent you, but it's just saying maximise those passive measures so that so you're not requiring occupants as the first act when it's getting a bit too warm is to turn on the air conditioning. It's to try and prevent that need to turn it on, but there is no ban. So to come back to your question, that's why I struggle with the question. It's like, where in the plan is it meant to be made easier to do it? I have trouble answering it for that reason.
So the question was in the context of the cooling hierarchy. Last month, the Climate Change Committee said we need to plan for more active cooling, such as air conditioning. So I guess the question is, in this context, is the cooling hierarchy still fit for purpose?
Broadly, yes, I think it is. That it's still permits air conditioning, but it requires people to maximise those measures, as I've said, that just in the same way, exactly the same way that in the heating hierarchy, it doesn't say, we don't care about how thick the walls are and what the insulation is. You've all got boilers, turn them up. In the same way that it doesn't say that. It's about heating, thermal efficiency, and then looking for the most effective and cost-efficient way of heating homes. That's why we're all talking about heat pumps and so on now. And this is just the cooling flip side of that. Minimise the overheating of a building, trying to design the building not to overheat in the first place. But if people want to put air conditioning in, there is no ban on that. And if that's what's required to make them comfortable and not exceed uncomfortable temperatures, get into uncomfortable temperatures, then that's fine.
Yeah, I guess that is the point to zero in on, is in a context of rising temperatures. We heard from the Met Office that temperatures could reach 40, 45 degrees. That could be common in years to come. The London Plan is a document which looks at the next 25 years. It is in that context of heating. Is the measures, passive measures, sufficient to keep Londoners cool, is the question.
And I think that's a good question. I think the way that will be tackled is in the modelling. And when buildings are designed, as you know, they go through a process of modelling how they will perform in different temperatures. And there are specific cases that the buildings are put through. And I think we have to be more forward-looking and perhaps more pessimistic in those cases that are applied to it, so that the judgments about whether the building will perform well still in those higher temperatures, we need to make sure that that modelling is appropriate for the increasing temperatures that we're facing.
Thank you. Assemblymember Boff.
The current greening and planning policies that we have in place were written up in context of what we knew then. Now we know that there is a threat to us from overheating. Are those policies keeping pace with that scale of challenge?
Greening policies?
Yeah.
I think the greening policies in the current plan were ambitious, and we're determined that the next plan equally will set ambitious targets and requirements of development. I mean, the thing is, if you're asking, are they sufficient? Well, clearly, the action that the world is taking on climate change isn't sufficient. I mean, if your question was simply, are those greening measures alone sufficient to make every individual building comfortable, then the answer of that has got to be no. There will be situations where buildings aren't able to ensure that all facades are shaded, or for whatever reason, the positioning of the building, the nature of the building doesn't lend itself well to passive measures. So it's inevitable then that mechanical measures, including air conditioning, might be required.
We heard earlier about the importance of dual aspect to cooling properties, and yet over the past few years we've heard criticisms of dual aspect because, of course, it means that fewer flats, for example, can be built on a particular floor. Is the London Plan going to resolve that, do you think?
There's no intention to change what the London Plan says about dual aspect. The current plan says, and the future one should say, that dual aspect should be maximised for the benefits that you allude to. Where there has been a change, as you'll be aware, I'm sure most of the committee are aware, that the London Plan guidance that addressed this issue went further than the plan itself in its wording, and therefore some boroughs, some decision makers applying that policy were clearly using it well, the phrase that's been used is in onerous fashion, but if I'm being frank, it was if people didn't like the building for other reasons, but really couldn't come up with good planning reasons, they said, oh, it hasn't got 100% dual aspect, we're refusing it. Now, that is unreasonable. It's very tricky. You have to have quite a large site. I mean, on a large development site, and say a regeneration site, multiple buildings, then you can achieve 100% dual aspect. I mean, they tend to be practically octagonal buildings, but it is achievable. But in many cases, and especially on smaller constrained sites, 70, 80% is a good figure to be achieving. And yeah, but expecting it to be 100% in every case is just a recipe for, you know, inviting people to turn down practically every development that comes before them. So that's why we made that change in the plan guidance. But the actual plan itself still stands, policy will stand, continue to stand, that it's clear that design should maximise the amount that's there, but it accepts that you can't get to 100% all the time.
Are we in danger? I mean, we've got the cooling hierarchy, which is a wonderful statement, of course. Are we in danger of having a hierarchy of hierarchies, that actually the drive for more homes is a more important hierarchy than the hierarchy of keeping cool quality homes?
It's probably a fair point. I mean, but that problem goes runs right through planning. I mean,
it does. I mean, whenever you talk about planning, it's always about a balance.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
and assessing that balance is difficult.
Yeah, and you know, you look at the London plan; it says quite clearly that the most important requirements are. Infrastructure investment requirements are affordable housing and transport. Yet often they're the balancing figure at the end of decision making, because there's so much else in the plan that is an absolute requirement to make the development acceptable. And that's when you get into the situation where what one has said are the most important things just becomes the balancing figure, because that's all that's left over at the end. So you're absolutely right. It is a balance to be made for all these, and just alighting on one thing and putting that at the very top, even if you could enforce it, is difficult, because you're going to undermine all your other perfectly valid requirements.
I mean, how many homes approved, do you think, under the current London plan would fail a tougher 2050 heat resilience test?
Should I put a figure on that?
I think it's really difficult. Yeah. A number, proportion, best guess?
I don't think you can sort of put a number on it now. You'd need to rerun the modelling of all those homes with different modelling and a different climate, weather files, as you heard from the previous panel.
So we can't actually say whether or not homes that are being currently permitted.
The difference between our policy and linked to guidance and the building regulations and requirements is that we seek to use different weather files. So we use the weather files at the base level for the building regulations, but we also look at hotter temperatures and longer summer temperatures. And so there's different weather files you can use for those, and that's what we require testing against, to test those sort of realistic London situations. And as part of thinking about the next plan and then the next sort of 20 years, we're looking at, well, what other do we need to be looking at different weather files, more updated weather files. And as you heard from the previous panel, from the CIBSE guidance, they're looking at updating the TM59 guidance, which is it's the same modelling everyone requires. So that will look, when it gets updated, that's likely to use more updated realistic weather patterns.
I mean, we all know planning is irritating, which is why I find it intriguing.
I object.
Well, it is, but I'm still here, aren't I? So,
sorry, Chair, my point is, though, that I wanted to make, although I apologise, I know you're only halfway through the question, but often these aren't planning's policies. Planning just writes the book that holds everybody else's policies. And it's all these things are societal asks or technical asks of development. I don't know. I won't hazard a guess about each individual planner's views on whether it's energy, whether it's the amount of affordable housing or whatever, but it's everybody else's ask that they're just tabulating.
And I've got a whole list of questions. I can squeeze one more in, Chair. Would increasing the provision of gardens and private amenity space help to reduce the likelihood and impact of overheating and extreme heat?
Well, the provision of green space, absolutely. It doesn't matter whether it's private space or public space. Surrounding developments with, tree canopy and soft planting and grass is inevitably better than tarmac and concrete surfaces.
And those things that are so often negotiated away at the planning stage. They'll give slightly less than the planning requirement, slightly less here. And people say, well, fair enough, it's only a little less, but it's only kids that are going to play in it. Now we've got a situation where the green space actually is a positive contribution to fighting overheating. Shouldn't the green space have now more importance?
I think it is important and remains important and will continue to be important in the next plan. I think sometimes where perhaps the appearance is otherwise is where there are constrained sites. I think we've talked about this in a similar way about sort of children's play space. That when things become a commuted sum that gets spent on improving existing space, and similarly on green space when it becomes commuted to a payment that upgrades a park or something, because it's a constrained site and it's just not realistic to expect any kind of development on, if it's a site that's the size of this chamber, realistically, where is the development going to go and the green space? This is going to end up becoming the footprint of a building, and in most cases, and therefore it would end up being a commuted sum for the planning requirements to make the building, the development acceptable. But that's not a result of because these things aren't valued any less, or there's any drift. It's just the practical, should these requirements, these requirements are there, they are made to apply wherever possible, but one can't then just use them, like the dual aspect example, to simply stop development because the site isn't big enough.
Yes, and that's where it just gets worse, bit by bit, bit by bit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In the GLA's response to the recent NPPF consultation, there was a call for the London plan to have the capacity to deviate from national standards on overheating. In which areas should the London plan be able to deviate?
Specifically on this topic, there's a list of things that we could say where I think the London plan should deviate from national standards. But just in relation to this, on energy efficiency, overheating and cooling, I think there are particular kind of dense, particular issues that are caused by denser urban living. The heat island effect, obviously, in relation to today's topic is real. I think a kind of a one-size-fits-all policy for the countryside and sparsely populated areas amongst greenfields or by the sea is clearly different to the kind of what the southeast faces and what London in particular faces. So we will be pushing for. We did push for a separate approach to be allowed for in London in our response to the NPPF, and if it is published if the NPPF is published before we publish the plan, I would suspect that there will be a number of areas, including this, where we will continue to push for a plan that's different, has different policies to national policy.
Would the idea be for stricter requirements on things like passive cooling than the NPPF is for London?
I'm going to call in Elliot, because I can't recall immediately what the NPPF was saying on it. Other than obviously they would default to Part the building regs. They don't want us to repeat anything that's in the building regs, but we don't think the building regs go far enough.
Yeah, that's the point, is that they would just mean that we wouldn't be able to have a policy on overheating because it's covered by the building regulations. And the key point that we argue, as well as the things that Jules has mentioned, is that if you deal with overheating at the planning stage, you get to influence the design. And if you leave it to the building regulations, the design is fixed by the planning permission pretty much. And all you do is end up going through that sequence that there's the list of passive measures, but you just jump straight into active cooling, because you then can immediately solve your problem and you tick the box. And the only way, and I know it's not perfect, as you heard the last panel about how much we're achieving on passive measures and how much the industry's taken them on, but dealing with it at the design stage is easily a much better option than leaving it and not dealing with it in planning at all.
So on that, your response would suggest that the economics of it are in favour of active cooling rather than passive cooling, from a development perspective? You think they'd rather go for active cooling than these passive measures?
I mean, if it's a cheaper option for them, yes.
The question is it a cheaper option? Because I think Elliot's response would suggest that it is.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a cheap option. It's just that the traditional build that we have is that it will likely potentially overheat. You know, in terms of, as you were hearing, like having the not having sufficient sort of external insulation, not putting in shutters and blinds, not doing the things that make the passive measures work. And because we don't have those as traditionally, you know, in the last sort of 20, 30 years, they default to their normal model of building, and then the way you solve the problem of overheating is to have some mechanical or active heating. If the model, you know, if the whole industry changed its sort of like design standards, then it would be cheaper from as you heard from the Peabody example.
So more ease and inertia rather than cost would be the motivation for it. Yeah. Understood. Thank you. Assemblymember Hamdash.
Great, thank you. Is the wider adoption of air-to-air heat pumps as a solution to London's cooling needs something that the GLA is exploring? Perhaps maybe bring in Dan as an opportunity?
I'm not sure. Are you referring to new development specifically, or?
Yeah, let's go from there.
I'm not wishing to deflect, but I wonder whether it might be better from a planning policy perspective.
I mean, there's a very live debate going on about this, not necessarily from a planning requirement point of view, but there is a debate about how you know the heating requirements are best met. Now, and I appreciate kind of the cassettes that do heating and cooling obviously could address this, and obviously they're very common in the EU, but there is an issue about their cost to residents, and particularly that they don't do hot water. So obviously residents are required to rely on, you know, a coefficient of 1 raw electricity in a tank to provide their domestic hot water. The preference at the moment would be that sort of a block of flats would have a single air source heat pump unit to provide both heating and hot water. I know there are ambitions for heat networks, but obviously there are not many active heat networks available to tap into. But it is a live debate in planning, because obviously there is a push, and there may well be a push coming down the road from central government about making connections to heat networks. And if in the short term they're not available, and we're requiring people to join onto a heat network that's being supplied by a boiler for the next 20 years, that doesn't sound very green to me. The alternative is being pushed by the development sector. About what section of the development sector is being heavily pushed on air-to-air heat pumps. As I said, and I know others have got a concern about that because of cost and the domestic hot water, as I've said. But the latest wave of air source heat pumps, you know, with a wet side, that can operate at a higher temperature and can do domestic hot water. I know of a number of sizable developments, 400 or 500 units, who are actively building with that single unit solution. So we're not expecting 500 flats with 500 air source heat pumps all whirring away. It's effectively the air source heat pump version of a boiler house in the block. And that to me seems to be both practical, immediately applicable and cost effective and green.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. And we're now moving to actions that the GLA Canon is taking. And I think you're shortly to publish your London Heat Risk Delivery Plan. Could you just very briefly outline to us what the primary purpose is and how will Londoners see a difference in their homes?
That's probably one for me.
Dan.
I'll take that one. Yeah. So I mean, just to provide a bit of context, I assume I didn't catch all of the panel earlier, but I assume they set out the context for why it's needed and the urgency and the background conditions of a changing climate. So the London Climate Resilience Review, commissioned by the Mayor but independently produced by Howard Boyd a couple of years ago, was quite clear that there are clear climate adaptation and climate resilience requirements across the board, but some climate risks are still fairly well served by existing activities, groups, partnerships, and so on. But probably the big gap was heat risk, not just for the built environment, but for right the way across all of London's kind of sectors, communities, organisations, and so on and so forth. So on the back of that, the GLA applied to an EU fund, part of the Horizon Fund, called Pathways to Resilience, to be part funded and led by sort of European standard guidance on producing urban heat plans and urban adaptation plans more broadly. So bearing in mind the London Climate Resilience Review recommendation around that gap, we chose to focus, or the Mayor's office chose to focus that on a heat programme specifically. Now, what we're doing at the moment is we've been working through that programme to produce I guess it's a vision, it's a call to action. It's due to be published this summer. And it looks right the way across London sectors, as I've mentioned, to look at the things that need to happen on adapting London to a warmer climate. So that's a climate where we see 40 degrees more often. We see a longer summer season altogether. We see homes that are already exist and are already overheating hotter for longer with shorter periods to actually cool down. So those are kind of the priority areas of focus. What it isn't is a built environment specific document. It's a call to action that looks right the way across the spectrum. So it considers built environment as a key and priority area within that for sure. But it also looks at what nature needs to do and how it will be impacted. It looks at London's infrastructure and the interaction between different infrastructure types, sort of cascading risks and intersection of those risks. It looks at the health and care system as well, which is critically important as part of this, both sort of the building stock, but also the sort of processes within that. It looks at the impacts on the business and the economy as well, and on the workforce. So it's wide-ranging. It's a start rather than the end of the process. So, we're not calling it an action plan per se. It's certainly not that yet, but it will be something that brings together. It's going to be about convening different sectors to bring them together to talk about how their existing plans interact and how the things they need to do in future, with the support of City Hall, to kind of accelerate and scale the adaptation process. And I suppose finally, one of the really important things that it's going to do is look at the funding gap. I mean, we've talked a lot about new builds today, but the majority of London's buildings already exist, and while not all properties overheat, I think you heard from your previous panel, some Victorian buildings, with high thermal mass, thick walls and so on, do quite well in warmer temperatures. A lot of them don't, and it's not just the new ones. Some of the older ones don't either. A lot of the conversions are problematic as well, and extensions and so on as well. So what I'm saying is retrofit's going to be really, really important. And significant programs for retrofit are going to be needed in the future, and there's a huge funding gap for that at present. So there's no obvious means for funding that. There is money out there, but the mechanisms for kind of capturing that money and directing it towards retrofit programs isn't really there at the moment. There are pilots underway that are promising, and it's those sorts of pilots that we want to tap into and find out how we can bring people together to scale those.
Thank you. I think having a vision and gathering evidence and diagnosing the problem is a really worthwhile piece of work. But I suppose I'm going to push you about what actions will actually come out of it. You said this is not an action plan. Will there be an action plan?
I wouldn't be able to commit to that yet. I have no doubt actions will come out of this in due course. As I say, we will be taking primarily a convening role in this, bringing organisations together, because there are existing sort of organisations, groups and partnerships that will be better placed to take this forward. Or there may be gaps where those groupings don't exist and probably should, and that's another thing that we really want to uncover through this. So the first step is by convening partners, which we're convening next week actually with an initial roundtable before the launch of the plan, to then launch the plan later this summer. Sorry, it's not a plan, the vision rather.
I mean, from our last evidence session, I think people were welcoming this, but there was some debate as to whether it would purely be a sort of a long-term strategic pulling together of things, and actually what was needed with some immediate action to prepare for those longer-term things, but also to help them. Have you identified any places where that short-term action could actually take place and have a short-term impact?
Yeah, so so first thing to say is, things are already happening. So we've talked about the role, the important role that the London Plan has in providing new green space, for example, and lots of the other policies within it are directed towards or have co-benefits that deliver heat risk benefits. So that's really important. The climate team at the GLA has been working on heat for many years already, working with boroughs very closely to deliver things like cool spaces, working in the emergency planning and response space as well. You will have heard about the water fountains project in the past, I'm sure, and lots of kind of empirical evidence-based studies to determine where we need to focus our efforts. And I think, in terms of prioritisation, underpinning all of this is the kind of social justice and equity point. So recognising that we're not going to be able to deliver against this agenda very quickly right the way across the board. So the intention is to focus our efforts in the places that need it most. And a lot of that work that we've done to date is about understanding, who the priority groups are and where the priority locations are. So climate risk maps, understanding those that might be in sort of socially disadvantaged area or economically disadvantaged areas tend to be the places that are also least green, have the narrowest streets, the most challenges with tree planting and so on. So things like thinking about our tree planting programme, which has, already delivered over 600,000 trees, thinking about how can we make that more targeted to those areas that actually need it, those areas that overheat it the most. So I think that's a really interesting area of work around, targeting greening campaigns towards places, investment and delivery in places that need it most already.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. What are you doing to address the issues of overheating in new build flats where the problem is particularly prevalent? We've heard talk about dual aspect, etc. Maybe I'll start with you, Jules, from a planning point of view. What are you doing to prevent it? Because when you talk about overheating, I think that's the first sort of typology that springs to mind.
I mean, from the planning perspective, all I can do from my area is ensure that the planning policy is sufficient. Obviously there is an issue of when these new builds were built. If it was built last year, I'd be concerned. If it was built 5-6 years ago, I'd still be concerned, but I'd at least understand that it was probably reliant on perhaps older policy, and not just older policy, older technology in terms of insulation and approach to windows and thermal efficiency of windows, reflectivity of windows. So my concern would be if newer blocks were not making progress, and especially if they were getting worse. I mean, you'd have to determine whether recently built blocks over the last decade who are failing to get cool enough in the summer, is it because simply they were not designed for these higher temperatures, or is there some other failure? I mean, so in terms of what are we doing? I mean, I don't think there is so much a failure of policy. I've said policy's got to keep up with the technology, got to keep up with the weather files that they're being modelled against, the designs, and then in turn, the technology of those designing building materials and then those implementing them and using them have also got to keep up with policy as well. So there are I would be the first to admit that there are a number of points of potential failure there in terms of, the between policy and actually the final product.
As it stands, could you imagine a building being approved and put up that would suffer from serious overheating problems today? Is it a possibility? I'm asking you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolute possibility if there was optimism in the effects of the performance of the materials used, and how well it was modelled. I mean, I'm not a technician on the modelling, and I don't know whether Elliot would have anything to say about the likelihood of unsuccessful designs making it through our more stringent models, that the weather files that they're put through, as Elliot said, what they're put through in London is higher than they're put through elsewhere. We take a forward look on the higher temperatures as opposed to just modelling how it would perform on today's regular average temperatures, and so it's stressed more. I mean, I don't know the likelihood of an inadequate design getting through that and what we could say to that.
Yeah, I think it would be that the files that we're modelling against, even in London, were not sufficient for that particular weather event that we had, and that's why we're obviously thinking about that going forward.
2022, and when it was really.
Yeah.
But there's only so much, short of a crystal ball, there's only so accurate any modelling can be, I suppose. Let me ask you, we've heard throughout this investigation that extreme heat disproportionately affects the most vulnerable in London. How's the GLA approaching this issue of vulnerability within the heat risk delivery plan, particularly for low-income households, older Londoners and people with existing health problems?
Sorry, just before Dan comes in, though, I think your question absolutely speaks to the issue about why we can't just say, just turn on your air conditioning, because those very people are not going to be able to, just in the same way it would be totally wrong to say to them, you're cold, you can turn your thermostat up. So, yeah, I think your question really does speak to that.
I happen to agree, because it's just the same thing, flipped on its head. We're a country we're used to being cold, aren't we? It's rainy old England. Turns out apparently it's going to get warmer, and we'll just have to respond in a similar way, just the other way around. Because I don't see air conditioning. If you say it to most British people, they'll go, what? Air conditioning? No.
And actually, particularly in a lot of Europe, despite the fact that plenty of bits of Europe that are far hotter than the UK and will get hotter than the UK, they still look wide-eyed at what, say, goes on in America in this constant, like, every room you walk into is like a nice 19 degrees at the height of summer. You go across, you go to somewhere like the Netherlands. I mean, they wouldn't dream of air conditioning in the way that we're beginning to talk about in this country.
I think it is worth contextualising that we do have a lot more heat deaths in southern Europe than in similarly temperate areas of America.
Yeah, you're correct. All I'm saying is we traditionally haven't lent on air conditioning, and I think this hierarchy business of passively doing it is probably the right approach, particularly because energy costs a hell of a lot of money in this country, so we want to respond to it without exposing ourselves to higher costs than we need to. But no, it's fine. We're all here to have a chat.
Just 1 second, Assemblymember Lord Bailey. Deputy Mayor, that is the end of the planning question, so if you're free to head off.
We'll release you to the wild.
It seems unfair to abandon Elliot, so I'm happy to stay for a bit longer.
I'm sure Elliot is big enough to look after himself. He's been walking on his own for years now. Anyway, I come to Dan. Do you need me to repeat the question, or are you ready to?
No, I'll have a crack, and then if I go wayward, then let me know. No, so we're absolutely, as I said before. I mean, I think the first thing to say is, we don't have a report yet. This call to action is in draft form, and so what I say now is subject to change, of course, but. But it will, as I say, it will be launched this summer. It is absolutely underpinned by equity. I've talked about the kind of huge price tag around retrofit. We know lots of people live in homes that aren't fit for purpose when it comes to a climate that's increasingly hotter for longer. So the collective we I talk about now, so the GLA and all the people that will form, or be part of the groups that underpin this kind of this heat-ready London approach, we'll need to focus on the areas of greatest risk, so the most vulnerable communities, and so on and so forth. So we talk about air conditioning. I mean, that will be part of the solution for sure. It just needs to be, much like the cooling hierarchy in the London Plan focuses on doing what you can passively first. In a warmer climate, we will do what we can in terms of retrofit through all the measures your guests talked about previously, but it only gets you so far, and there will be certain groups, certain communities, certain places where passive measures won't be enough. But what we want is programmes that consider that first, ideally design them in, and then where you need it. Thinking about certain temperature thresholds or whatever, then air conditioning will need to be part of that. But what we hope is it can be minimised as far as possible, and looking at more efficient solutions and whether heat pumps are part of that solution or whatever. But that's that's going to need to be the approach. And then for the broader retrofit ask, it's going to be about looking at all sorts of sort of blended funding and financing options to try and meet that funding gap. So we'll need to look at what role the insurance sector can play, bringing them together, and potentially new models there. Thinking about other ways of kind of capturing the money that people spend, whether it be local, regional, or national purses. So we're doing this already in other parts of adaptation. So around flood risk funding, it's still a big challenge as well. But there are interesting new models, blended funding and financing models that are emerging. And I imagine we will need to consider something for tackling the heat risk retrofit cost, I think.
Okay, thank you. Chair?
Assemblymember Hamdash.
Thank you. So we heard that as many as 75% of social housing could be at risk of overheating. What actions is the GLA taking now to work with providers to address these risks?
That's existing social housing. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say it's early days in this process. We've got a lot to do. We've made a strong start by understanding the risks, and we published a report a couple of years ago called "Properties Vulnerable to Heat," which gives us an idea of where we need to target our efforts. I think what probably needs to happen is retrofit for adaptation in isolation is a really expensive process. It comes back to things as mundane as scaffolding. Like, you literally don't put up scaffolding outside a building to retrofit a property to do adaptation alone, unless you have a really interesting funding model for it. And so we're going to need to be joining up with other activities to make sure it's viable. Otherwise, it just won't happen. I think it's likely to be too expensive. An exception to that might be, the most vulnerable homes, the most vulnerable communities. That would be a sensible way to prioritise adaptation-only action. But in the broader sense, the number of properties is likely to be over 1 million existing properties in London that needs to be retrofitted for heat in a sort of medium to long term. To do that, we need to be looking at things like, for example, but not limited to, Warmer Homes London and other existing retrofit programs that do it for energy efficiency, because, that's an absolute priority to try and reach net zero. But nevertheless, it doesn't necessarily make sense to do. If we know we need to retrofit those properties as well, then we should be doing it at the same time. And just to be clear, some of those programs are already doing that. And we're working with the Warmer Homes London team to look at how we can expand and grow the retrofit interaction with the existing programmes.
Just a follow-up question from me. You helpfully talked about one of the barriers to kind of standalone works. Do you think there are any other barriers when it comes to sort of getting this work into social housing, whether that's the density of leaseholders in a block or issues around conservation areas? Do you think there's a role for GLA to help councils navigate those plans, challenges?
I think it's an interesting question. I won't say it's my area of expertise, but I think one of your previous panelists talked about Chobham Manor. So we've been funding LLDC to do a climate adaptation strategy, and we're doing a specific piece of work. And I think you're actually going out to see it in a couple of weeks' time, and one of my colleagues will be talking you through the piece of work that we're doing there. That will give you a good feel for some of the challenges of retrofitting a property. You go in there with best intentions and you want to retrofit every unit, but you won't necessarily get access to it for lots of reasons. And as you say, there are leasehold, freehold challenges that you need to iron out as well as planning approvals. To get planning approval for one block, multiple blocks. So yeah, I mean, there are definitely a whole host of different challenges, and I think probably there is a role in due course for some form of best practice guidance around that, though that's not something we've kind of committed to yet. I could see it as being something that might be an interesting thing to look at as part of this heat work once we publish our report.
And how is the GLA working with local communities to just raise awareness around heat risks? Is there guidance online that people can follow? How can we navigate for Londoners?
Yep, there is. We've got a good page on the GLA website. We have programmes as well. So, I mean, as part of building the evidence base to inform, the Heat Ready London work, we have, we've gone out and spoken to communities. We've commissioned academic partners to capture lived experience of how people experience heat and some of the challenges it presents. And to who as well, and coming down to a specific local London, we've used Talk London in the past to gauge Londoners' views. We've also used post-occupancy surveys as well to understand what some of the specific challenges are as well. And then through not necessarily the work of my team, but we work closely with the infrastructure team and the resilience team at the GLA as well. And they're doing lots of really good work around community resilience as well. So going out and speaking to the most impacted communities about the things they can do. And it's not limited to heat risk, but heat risk is certainly part of it. So there are broader resilience questions that they need to consider as well as part of that work. But they're really good at going out through the voluntary community and faith sector groups, and that's a really good kind of channel into those communities. And by sort of delivering programs that upskill those community groups, then it can be delivered and further reaching through those mechanisms.
Thank you. And our first meeting, we heard support for the idea of naming heat waves as a main way of kind of raising awareness, something that we obviously do with things like storms. And that could be at a regional or citywide level, given obviously in London and the South East the heating problem is more acute. Given the Mayor's experience with issuing high air pollution alerts, is this something the GLA could see working for heat waves in the future?
Well, I think it's, I have to be careful not to get into the domain of the UK Health Security Agency here. So we work really closely. We've got a really engaged public health unit that works really closely with the health system and the health sector. And, what this work on heat will do partly going forwards is, that there will be a really big, strong, well-engaged health system component to this as well. So those links are already there and they're strong. But in terms of messaging, it's probably for the likes of the UK Health Security Agency, who already do that. They issue heat health alerts already, and I believe the Mayor kind of amplifies them and retweets them and so on. So that kind of already exists. But more broadly, I think there is a role to probably improve and impress on the general public the dangers around heat risk. And I think, probably won't go down this road in this debate, but there is something around, the way media portrays heat being slightly problematic, in that, it is dangerous. So it comes with lots of kind of added risks during a heat wave.
Dangerous in what sense? It's too celebratory?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is a personal view now, but yeah, I think we've all seen ice creams on the front of newspapers when a heat wave's coming. Is that the right message?
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Clark.
Question. Final question comes from me. So we've heard of at the first meeting, when I'm subbing in for Sam today, so I wasn't actually in the first meeting, but at the first meeting, it was discussed that an EPC-style assessment of dwellings indicating what sort of level risks they are for heat and overheat could be developed. Would this be a policy that the GLA would support? And just kind of a bit of an angle, I do wonder if, when things come to planning, particularly major applications, one of the criticisms often is around, we talked about dual aspect before and single aspect windows. Do we think schemes could carry such a label at planning phase? They're conferring.
Dan's brave enough to go.
Dan, go on.
Well, I'm probably not ready to go. I'm just going to come in and just sort of say that we have. It's not something we're currently looking at from the sort of climate team side of things, though we have previously looked at kind of whole building certificates or whole home certificates, so not heat specific, but
Right.
heat would be a component of that. It's often come up in the water efficiency space, actually, trying to influence properties to reduce their water consumption. So maybe not something for this particular meeting, but if you're looking at it in that space, then it would make sense to incorporate other climate risks.
I mean, just hearing from the first panel today, though, it does seem that this is a space that plainly needs improvement. We've got lots of Londoners who are living in homes made, that are unsafe because of the materials that are in them and the heat that those homes hold. Maybe this is a topic for another time, but I do think there's probably some legs to this, and getting those warnings out to would-be purchaser, would-be renter, those sorts of people. Because if, like with any home risk, if there's a risk, or if you know that you need to be putting investment into this home to cool it, it does seem like it would be good to know that.
Yeah, I'd say it sounds a perfectly sensible idea. I think, though, similar to some of the things I've talked about earlier in the measures to kind of achieve the outcomes, there really matters for building control. And the only reason we talk about them in the plan is because, as both Elliot and I have said, building control comes too late in the process. Instead of us shoehorning these things into planning, they ought to be in building control done early on developments, and they would be the people who would be setting the standards, basing it on empirical evidence, and then doing post-occupancy monitoring and enforcement. That would be the best way to do it.
Fair enough. James, I think that's all.
We've now reached the end of the session. I would like to thank all our guests for attending this meeting and for all your contributions today. The committee has a few more short items of business to address. Can I ask the committee to note the report and discussion? Can also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and its meeting dates and the additional activity undertaken since our last meeting, namely the informal meeting with the Met Office on the 1st of June? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 8th of July 2026 at 2 p.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3, City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.
The home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.